In 1606, French explorer Samuel de Champlain arrived on the shores of Cape Cod, a peninsula curving into the Atlantic Ocean on the northeast coast of what he knew as the New World. Champlain's maps and notes are valued as some of the earliest written accounts of Cape Cod history. But the story of this land really begins several millennia before the arrival of the white man from across the sea. There are few memorials to the indigenous people who were the real discoverers of Cape Cod, and they did not keep written chronicles of their long tenure on these shores. Yet the native people here have a heritage far older and richer than the white man can ever portray. Theirs is an unwritten history, stretching back 11,000 years into the chill mists of the last ice age. They were the people of the dawn. Every day they gave thanks for the gifts from the great provider Washokum, the sea. And they prayed to all the powers of nature, to the sky, the moon, the four winds, to the thunder and the rain. They were protected by a gentle giant named Moshop, who puffed on his pipe and surrounded them with fog. These were the first keepers of the Narrowland, and it is said that no other owners of this seaward peninsula have experienced their intimacy of possession. For 10,000 years, this was not just their homeland, but the heart of indigenous culture and the soul of their religion. Every beast, rock, tree, and blade of grass on this fragile spit of land was held sacred and treated with respect. And it is this land which has survived what most of the natives have not, the onslaught of another civilization, of explorers and then settlers who claimed they'd found a new world and set out to make it their own. Today, Cape Cod's few remaining Native Americans still dance to throbbing drums and to the rhythms of ancient ancestors. They are the Wampanoags, the people of the first light, and theirs is the last remaining native community on Cape Cod. This widely attended summer powwow in Mashpee proves that the sun has not set on their centuries-old culture. But the elaborate ceremony is a distant reminder of the civilization which thrived along the Atlantic coast of North America long before the first white men ever arrived. And there is far more to remember about their culture than colorful dances and noisy chants. They taught colonial settlers to cultivate many crops such as corn, beans, and squash. Modern New England still enjoys other native originals like clam bakes, pumpkins, and paddling in gracefully shaped canoes. We also travel over the ways and paths originally worn deep by the soft tread of moccasined feet. Few of the tourists who descend on Cape Cod every summer are aware of this long thread of indigenous history that runs beneath the peninsula's quaint towns and sun-warmed beaches. Yet the natives of the Narrowland have a durable, if mostly intangible, heritage passed down from prehistory.
Sand and dirt loose, but I can't get it away without burying the next thing over. And that's really kind of frustrating.
Concrete evidence from this unwritten history of Cape Cod is brought forth from the shifting sands and glacial silt of the peninsula's ever-changing landscape. Archaeologists try to piece together the history of the first Cape Codders by the ancient remains of their campfires, kitchens, and garbage heaps. Here, near the shores of Pleasant Bay, in what is now the town of Orleans, bulldozers digging a modern-day septic pit unearthed a 3,000-year-old refuse heap in the summer of 1991.
Dig it up.
Fred Dunford, staff archaeologist at the Cape Cod Museum of Natural History, was called in to conduct the excavation.
The site is a shell midden, and midden is a Danish word that means kitchen area. And this is about 3,000 years of accumulated refuse, food remains, animal bones, shellfish, broken stone tools, ceramic sherds from pottery vessels, things of that nature. It's a place where activities are carried out, cooking, cleaning, butchering, all kinds of things like that. So there people are working on and around the midden and probably camping just off the midden. We think the site was first occupied around 3,000 years ago, and the most recent date we have at the site is at about 1200 AD. So somewhere after 1200 AD, the site was abandoned. Those units now fall within
The ancestors of the people who camped at this site were the first Cape Codders, known to scientists as Paleo-Indians. They arrived at Cape Cod on the tail end of the Ice Age, roughly 11,000 years ago, eventually reaching the Atlantic coast and the curving strand of foothills that we know as Cape Cod. It was the end of the last ice age, and the miles-deep burden of ice that had gripped most of North America was beginning to recede. These first Cape settlers were hunter-gatherers, moving with changing resources and seasons. They followed herds of caribou, mammoth and mastodon, which roamed New England and this new easternmost land created by the glaciers. The huge woolly beasts soon became extinct, and the hunters were left to reap the bounty of new species that appeared on land and sea as the climate warmed.
They were highly mobile, would have moved 200 or 300 miles in a seasonal round every given year, moving to areas as resources became available in different areas, maybe anadromous fish runs in the spring and hunting in the winter and so forth. So they were highly mobile, and their mobility was as much a tool as their stone spears.
And would they have looked the same as the people that the Pilgrims met?
Yeah, they were Native Americans.
Right. Okay.
At the time of the earliest settlers, Cape Cod's Atlantic shore was miles to the east of where it is today. The popular Atlantic fishing ground of George's Bank was then dry land, but sea level was rising rapidly. Robert Oldale, geologist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, has an intimate knowledge of Cape Cod's formative years.
So there was a very dramatic drop in sea levels, such that 10,000 years ago, if the Paleo-Indian was sitting on the shoreline, in his lifetime, he'd have to pack up and move if he still wanted waterfront. At the same time, once that low stand was reached, which was about 12,000 years ago, the rebound essentially was over, and the sea was coming up very fast worldwide, and that would make a very rapid advance in sea level, and he would have seen that too. He'd have been around. The Paleo-Indians, the early archaic Indians living along the shore were witness to a very dynamic change in where the shoreline was.
Eventually, by about 3,000 years ago, Cape Cod began to look more or less as we know it today. A long, narrow, flexed arm of land surrounded on three sides by the sea. Nowadays, the remains of Cape Cod's oldest native settlements are submerged deep beneath the Atlantic, hidden in the ocean floor. Local fishermen now ply waters above the hunting grounds of prehistory. Their nets bring up mastodon teeth, arrowheads, and other artifacts from the seabed. The archaeological record of prehistoric Cape Codders has also been lost to development, erosion, and irresponsible collecting. Shell middens exposed by natural erosion or human activities attract curious treasure hunters who often disturb and loot the ancient sites. Here, the remains of a prehistoric seafood supper lie exposed and crumbling on a coastal bluff.
We come down to the factors of erosion and vandalism. The extent to which we lose archaeology to vandalism or to non-scientific collecting of materials, we really are not able to guess. We hear through the grapevine that there are a number of people on the Outer Cape who have had arrowhead collecting as a hobby for many years. We do everything that we can to preserve archaeological sites undisturbed. Excavating a site is a little bit like having just one copy of a tape recording of a musical performance, and you can only play it on this machine that erases as it plays. So you want to be sure that the one good time to play that tape has arrived before you both play and destroy it, and that's exactly, of course, what we encountered with the excavation of an archaeological site.
At this site on Coast Guard Beach in Eastham, nature, not the archaeologist, chose when the record would be played. In December 1991, winter storms exposed the foundations of one of the oldest settlements ever discovered in New England. The race to record and collect artifacts from the 8,000-year-old site before it washed away made national news. So when the ancient shell midden was discovered intact near Pleasant Bay in Orleans, just a few months later, Cape Cod's prehistory again made headlines.
The landscape of this East Orleans home. What at least they think they do have is a significant link to the piece of a puzzle for prehistoric settlement patterns. One such piece is in evidence by the unearthing of a possible cooking area.
This is a cluster of burned rock, a feature where some activity occurred, and we've pedestaled it so that we can excavate it more carefully. We don't just want to dig through it. And now we'll open up the 1 meter block just to the west of here and see if it continues into that area. But it's an indication of some of the activity that took place in the site. It looks like a fireplace or hearth.
Jan Cruzen is the present resident of this historic site, and she says it's thrilling to think that someone else had been there first.
It's such a link with the past, to think that people lived here thousands of years ago and that you're almost touching their things, that, you know, you hold an arrowhead, a carved arrowhead that's over 1,000 years old, and it's a very intimate link with the people who were here before. It's wonderful.
Sifting, excavating, cleaning, recording. The smallest piece can help fill in the archaeological puzzle, but even more important than what they discover is the context in which they find it.
The thing that's interesting about archaeology, no matter where it's practiced, is it's the only science that provides a long perspective on human behavior. You know, you have a perspective here that goes back 11,000 years. So we can look at changing cultures and ask questions about social relations, adaptation, changing environments, and so forth. And by doing that, we can get a sense of how human beings act over long periods of time. Our history on this continent is very short, and it doesn't give us a lot of perspective to look at things like social change and cultural change. So I think archaeology provides that. It gives a perspective, a long perspective.
Archaeologists can tell, for instance, from the location and small size of this site that it may have been used seasonally, perhaps by several families as a winter camp. The hill that rises at its northern end would have protected inhabitants from chilling winds. Its sunny southern exposure would have provided additional warmth. The camp is close to a freshwater pond for vital drinking water and to the shore and tidal pools of Pleasant Bay for all kinds of seafood. This bountiful setting is what first attracted people to this site about 3,000 years ago, during what is known as the Archaic period. The layers of remains suggest that people kept coming here, off and on for 2,000 years. And today, the Midden provides a wealth of information on the resources and prehistoric environment of those people.
The Midden accumulates and preserves organic materials because the calcium carbonate leaches out of the shells and neutralizes the soil's acidity. So therefore, the preservation conditions are quite good, and the blackness of the Midden is basically organic material. Below this, there's no shell, and it's very acidic, and hence you have very little preservation, very poor preservation.
By preserving organic remains, the Midden yields clues to prehistoric hunting, fishing, and gathering methods, to housing, cooking, and especially diet.
This is a pit that the inhabitants of the site excavated into the subsoil, and it contains lots of the different types of shell that we find at the site. Soft shell clam here, you see quahog, hard shell clam at the edge of the pit, and basically those are the two major species that we found here. Yeah.
Other artifacts show that the natives feasted on deer, fox, turkey, many kinds of fish and seabirds. They hunted with stone weapons and tools fashioned by hand. They also planted gardens, which eventually transformed their mobile camps into permanent settlements. This transformation occurred at about the same time the seasonal camp in Orleans was abandoned.
One of the important things that we did find here are carbonized kernels of corn that we've dated to about 1200 AD, and there's an important debate over the timing of the adoption and intensification of maize horticulture. And we have been able to bracket the time. We know that certainly by 1200 AD these folks were growing corn, and we know that in the early historic record from 1605 and thereafter that there seems to be surplus production. So in the last 400 years, the last 4 centuries of the prehistoric period, agricultural intensification was happening. Why, we can't get at. We don't have a handle on that yet. But it's an important transition, and the transition or the intensification of agriculture would have had a lot of important social implications. Perhaps a change in gender roles, an increasing importance of women's roles. Maybe it would have affected the demography or kin reckoning. So there's probably a lot that happened. And another important question is why intensify your agricultural efforts? What's driving that? What set of internal or external or variables or both are kicking that?
The first people to plant corn were their cousins to the south, who began sowing crops thousands of years earlier, gradually passing their invaluable knowledge northwards. It was knowledge that would have tremendous impact on the lives of Native Americans.
Life was much harder at one level. I can tell you that if we looked at the teeth of any of these folks, they would have been pitted. They would not have lived long lives. They would have worked hard, especially the women. We know that from the skeletal remains. Their diet would have been very starchy. Their lives at this time were dramatically being altered, and thousands of years of tradition were now being changed.
Nevertheless, over the course of just a few hundred years, somewhere between 1000 AD and the arrival of the Europeans in the 1600s, the natives of Cape Cod embraced farming as their way of life. Nowadays, the locals say that the grass still grows a little greener on the ancient cornlands. Prehistoric fields used to cover this lush land in what is now the town of Chatham. By the 16th century, there were at least half a dozen large settlements, each with its own chief, scattered along Cape Cod. They lived in circular houses made of bent saplings. The locals called these wigwams, wetu. The winter camp was located in an area of great significance, known today as Poshet Neck. It was known to the Native Americans as Poshi, or the dividing place, and it represented the territorial boundary between two Native American communities, the Norsets and the Monomoyaks. The site could have been where the two communities gathered for intertribal meetings or seasonal events.
There's archaeological sites all across the dividing place. So if it was really a dividing place territorially between two entities, bounds would have shifted back and forth all across those 3,000 years, have been opened and closed and moved north and moved south. So I think it should be a place where there's lots of different types of people over time. I mean, we can get the seasonality of the site, at least for some visits, down based on the presence of certain species. We can do that for sure. We can say that if that fish turns out to be tomcod, that during that time of the year, those people are at the site. If, on the other hand, we find something that's only around in the summer, maybe a certain migratory bird, then we could say, well, people were there. I think an important caveat to that is to be aware of the fact that people did things for lots of different reasons, and then they were not always just seasonal or directed by subsistence. There were lots of reasons to do things. why not a festival site? Why not a place where people came at one point in the year to renew kin ties, to visit, to share stories? And what are you going to do there? You're going to eat, you're going to throw stuff away, you're going to process, you butcher the animals you caught. So behavior is really complex. It's a warning to people like me that maybe the way I see the world isn't always the best way to see the world.
Although the archaeologists are unsure exactly what the natives did at the site, they do know that the people of this place were Wampanoags, offshoots of the powerful Algonquin family of tribes, which stretched from the Carolinas to Canada. They spoke dialects from a common language and shared certain resources, perhaps large shellfish beds or fishing grounds. There is no evidence that they fought, but many signs that they traded together, exchanging clay pipes, pottery, and beads. The goods were carefully crafted and artistically decorated with the unique designs of each tribe. Indeed, these distinctive bits of clay would outlive the people who molded them. When Samuel de Champlain arrived at these shores in 1606, he drew detailed maps and made careful notes about the people who lived here. We saw in this place some 500 to 600 savages, all naked except their loins, which they cover with doe or seal skin. They wear their hair carefully combed and twisted in various ways, both men and women. Their bodies are well proportioned and their skin olive-colored. As weapons they have bows, arrows, clubs. They are not so much great hunters as good fishermen and tillers of the soil. But Champlain and other foreign chroniclers oversimplified the complex society that they found on Cape Cod. Perhaps because the natives passed down their heritage by word and song instead of by picture, image, or letters. Today, native words are only found written on road signs. Many local landmarks and almost all lakes and rivers are still known by their original Native American names. But this is an illusion of continuity. The arrival of the Europeans began 2 centuries of plague, pestilence, and oppression that would effectively raise the foundation of more than 10,000 years of native lifestyle and culture.
There are some things that some people aren't keeping up with. The language is one of them. However, that is coming back too, because there are peoples, particular individuals, who are very interested in keeping that alive and trying to bring it back to the young people. We have the sweat lodge. The men and even the women sometimes use the sweat lodge. There are Thanksgiving ceremonies, at many different times. Ceremonies at first light, because Wampanoag means people of the first light. There are some, for instance, some people who are very talented in dancing, some of the native dances, or in singing, or in making special jewelry in the old ways, using quill work or present-day bead work. And so usually what these people do is they give of their talents and their time to teach the Wampanoag children. I think that the ceremonial ways here, the spiritual ways, keep a nation intact, keep a culture intact. The knowledge and the love of Mother Earth keep the nation intact. All of the ceremonies, maybe some of the language isn't spoken in some of the nations, but even if among a few native people they're holding on to their culture by some threads, I would hope that other indigenous nations and people would encourage that, and that even non-indigenous people would encourage that and say, hold on to at least what you have and strengthen those threads.
Today, the Wampanoags of Mashpee hold on to their native lifestyle and culture. They don't need archaeologists to understand their past. It is part of their collective memory. But for others, what little remains of the ancient homes and hearths is an important reminder about Cape Cod's origins, about the indigenous people brushed under the carpet of American history.
The Creator has sent many messages down to tell us about things that we had forgotten at times, things that were very important that has to do with our life today, that we have no longer used until just recently. The Creator has given us one gift that we all have had, whether we're using it today or not, but He gave us the gift of love, and the gift of understanding, and the gift of respect for all creation. And so our prayer, or our thanksgiving, begins by thanking the Creator for the sun that rose this morning, to remind us that we all have a new day in life, and to remind us that we are able to try to correct some of yesterday's mistakes, and it reminds us that we have an opportunity to try to make tomorrow a better place for our children to come up in.
Archaeology can provide clues, and it can prompt us to ask new questions about this land. Deep underground, at least, are the imprints left by the natives themselves. But the age-old wisdom held in the hearts of Native Americans as they sing and they dance to the ancient rhythms is something that the sands of Cape Cod can never yield.